I didn't come to Ethiopia looking for God. I came looking for something older, something carved into stone before empires fell, before the world forgot how to believe. They say the churches here were hidden for a reason. And after what I found, I understand why. The road to Lalibela is not kind. It winds through the highlands of northern Ethiopia like a scar cutting through red earth. The air is thin up here at 2,500 meters above sea level, and every breath feels like you're borrowing it from somewhere ancient. Dust clings to everything, to the tires of the bus, to the skin of children running barefoot along the roadside, to the memories this place refuses to let go of. I arrived at dusk. The town sits cradled between jagged mountains, their peaks disappearing into low clouds that never seem to lift. Stone houses with corrugated metal roofs cluster together like they're protecting each other from something unseen. Smoke rises from cooking fires. The smell of injera baking on clay stoves mixes with the scent of eucalyptus and earth. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rings, not the bright chime of celebration, but something deeper, older, like a warning. I met my guide the next morning. His name was Tekel. He didn't smile much, but his eyes carried the kind of weight that comes from spending a lifetime walking between worlds, the living and the dead, the sacred and the forgotten. He spoke in short sentences as if words themselves were too heavy to waste. "You want to see the churches?" he asked. I nodded. "Then we walk." The path descended almost immediately. Not down a hill but into the earth itself. Lalibela's churches are not built, they are carved. Hewn from solid volcanic rock over 800 years ago, during the reign of King Lalibela, a man who claimed to have received divine instructions from angels. Some say he wanted to create a new Jerusalem after Muslim conquests blocked Ethiopian Christians from pilgrimage. Others whisper darker reasons, that he was hiding something, that these churches were never meant to be temples at all but vaults. We reached the first church through a narrow trench, its walls rising 15 meters on either side. The rock was red, almost bleeding in the morning light. Above us, the sky was a thin strip of pale blue. Below, shadows pooled like water. Beit Medhani Elam, the house of the Savior of the world. The largest monolithic church on earth. It stood before me like a ghost made solid, carved entirely from one piece of stone, its columns thick and ancient, its roof flat and silent. There were no seams, no joints. Just stone shaped by hands that knew something we've forgotten. I stepped inside. The temperature dropped. The air smelled of incense and time. Dim light filtered through narrow windows, casting long shadows across the floor. In the corner, a priest sat wrapped in white robes, his face half hidden, his lips moving in silent prayer. He didn't acknowledge me. Maybe he didn't need to. Maybe he'd seen 1,000 travelers like me, searching, questioning, never quite understanding. Tekel leaned close. They say King Lalibela built these churches in 24 years. But no one knows how. No scaffolding. No cranes. Just stone and faith. And angels? I asked. He didn't answer. He just looked at me with those tired eyes and said, "Come. There's more." If you've ever felt that same silence, type the word silence below. And if you're ready to follow me deeper into places the world forgot, consider subscribing. Because what I found next changed everything. We descended further. The churches of Lalibela are connected by a labyrinth of tunnels and trenches, pathways carved through bedrock that wind beneath the town like veins. Some are wide enough for 2 people. Others force you to turn sideways, your shoulders scraping stone that hasn't seen sunlight in centuries. Tekel led me through passages that seemed to have no end. The walls were cool and damp. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness. I lost track of time. Minutes? Hours? Down here it didn't matter. This was a place outside of time. We emerged into a small courtyard, open to the sky but surrounded by sheer rock walls. At the center stood a doorway, low and narrow, carved into the face of the cliff. Inside, I could see the flicker of candlelight. "The priests live here," Tekel said. "They have for centuries." I ducked through the entrance. The cave was larger than I expected. A natural hollow expanded by human hands, its ceiling blackened by smoke, its walls lined with wooden shelves holding something precious. Manuscripts. Hundreds of them. Bound in leather, wrapped in cloth, stacked carefully like the last remnants of a dying world. An old priest sat cross-legged on the floor, bent over a piece of goatskin parchment, writing with a bamboo pen dipped in ink he'd made himself, charcoal, water, and gum from acacia trees. He looked up when I entered. His face was lined, deeply creased, but his eyes were sharp. He gestured for me to sit. "Do you know what this is?" he asked in Amharic. Tekel translated. I shook my head. "This is the Book of Enoch. You will not find it in your Bible." The West removed it. But we kept it. We keep everything. He showed me the pages. The text was written in Guizi, the ancient liturgical language of Ethiopia, a script that looks like art more than words. He explained that the Ethiopian Bible contains 88 books, far more than the 66 recognized by most of the Christian world. Books about angels and demons, about the Nephilim, about the watchers who fell from grace. Stories that were buried, erased, forbidden. Why keep them hidden here? I asked. The priest smiled faintly. Because the world is not ready. And because those who seek to destroy always find what is visible. But what is hidden endures. I spent hours in that cave watching the priest work. His hands trembled slightly as he wrote, but his strokes were precise, deliberate. This was more than preservation. This was ritual. Every letter a prayer. Every page a shield against forgetting. As the sun began to set, Tekel and I returned to the surface. The sky had turned the color of rust. The wind carried the sound of chanting, deep, rhythmic, almost hypnotic. It came from somewhere in the mountains, echoing off stone, carried by air that had touched these rocks for 1,000 years. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in a small guest house, listening to the wind and the distant voices. And I thought about what the priest had said. About hiding. About endurance. About the things we protect by making them invisible. But the real story was only beginning. What came next would test everything I thought I knew about faith, fear, and how far people will go to keep their gods alive. If this story has gripped you so far, consider subscribing. The journey only gets deeper from here. The road to Tigray is harder. Much harder. It takes us north, through highlands that grow wilder, more remote, until even the villages disappear and all that remains is rock and sky and silence. Tekel told me we were going to see Abuna Yemata Guh, the church in the sky. I'd heard stories about it, whispers from other travelers, warnings from locals. They said it was the most dangerous church in the world. That only the faithful could reach it. That some who tried never came back. I thought they were exaggerating. They weren't. We arrived at the base of the mountain just after dawn. The cliff rose vertically, a sheer wall of red sandstone that seemed to pierce the clouds. And somewhere up there, 250 meters above the ground, carved into the face of that impossible rock, was a church built 1,500 years ago by one of the 9 saints of Ethiopia, holy men who brought Christianity to this land when Rome was still falling. Why build it here? I asked. Tekel looked up at the cliff. To be closer to heaven. Or to hide from enemies. Maybe both. The climb began. No ropes. No harness. Just hands and feet and faith. Tekel went first, moving with the ease of someone who'd done this 100 times. I followed, my palms already slick with sweat. The rock was rough, pitted with handholds and footholds worn smooth by centuries of pilgrims. But the exposure was terrifying. One glance down and the world dropped away, a dizzying fall into nothing. I pressed myself against the stone, feeling my heartbeat pound in my ears. Halfway up, the path narrowed to a ledge barely wider than my foot. The wind picked up, tugging at my clothes, whispering in my ears. Below, the valley stretched out like a painting, green fields, scattered huts, the silver thread of a distant river. Beautiful. Deadly. Tekel stopped. He removed his shoes. From here we walk barefoot. The rock is holy. I did the same. The stone was cold beneath my feet. Every step felt like a prayer, or a plea. We climbed for 20 minutes. It felt like hours. My legs shook. My hands cramped. But then, finally, I saw it. A narrow opening in the cliff face just wide enough for a man to squeeze through. The entrance to Abuna Yemata Guh. I crawled inside. The church was small, maybe 10 meters by 10, carved entirely into the rock. But what took my breath away were the walls. Frescoes. Painted 1,500 years ago. Saints and angels staring down from the ceiling, their faces serene, their eyes following me as I moved. Colors that should have faded centuries ago. Reds, blues, golds, still vivid, still alive. A priest stood near the altar. He was young, maybe 30, dressed in simple white robes. He smiled when he saw me. "Welcome," he said in accented English. "You've come far." "I have," I said, still catching my breath. "Why?" he asked. I didn't have an answer. Not one that made sense. He nodded as if he understood anyway. "Most people ask why we built this church here. They think it's madness. But you know what I tell them? The higher you climb, the harder it is for evil to follow." I looked at the frescoes again. At the angels and saints. At the faces that had watched over this place for 15 centuries. "Do you believe that?" I asked. He smiled. "I climb this mountain every day. What do you think?" I left Abuna Yemata Guh as the sun reached its peak. The descent was worse than the climb. Every step a negotiation with gravity, every handhold a gamble. But when I finally reached the ground, I felt something I hadn't expected. Gratitude. Not just for surviving, but for witnessing something that shouldn't exist. A place too dangerous, too remote, too impossible to be real. And yet it was. And people still came. Still climbed. Still believed. But Tigray holds darker memories too. The region I was standing in had been torn apart by war. From 2020 to 2022, a brutal civil conflict ravaged these highlands, leaving tens of thousands dead and nearly 2 million displaced. Churches were occupied, damaged, looted. Priests were killed. Manuscripts were burned. Tekel didn't talk much about it, but I could see it in his eyes. The way he looked at the mountains. The way he paused sometimes as if listening for something that wasn't there anymore. We visited a village that had been destroyed. Walls reduced to rubble. Roofs caved in. The church at its center, a small rock-hewn chapel no bigger than a room, had been shelled. Half the ceiling was gone. But inside, on the remaining walls, frescoes still clung to the stone. Faded. Cracked. But there. An old woman sat near the entrance, wrapped in a faded shawl. She spoke to Tekel in Tigrinya. He translated. She says the soldiers came at night. They took everything. Food. Animals. They burned the manuscripts. The ones the priests couldn't hide. Where did they hide them? I asked. She pointed toward the mountains. In the caves. Where the old gods used to sleep. I thought about that phrase. The old gods. Before Christianity came to Ethiopia, this land worshipped other powers. Spirits of the mountains, the rivers, the sky. When the church arrived, it didn't erase those beliefs. It absorbed them. Layered them. The sacred places remained sacred, just under different names. That night I camped near the ruins. The stars above were impossibly bright, scattered across the sky like salt spilled on black cloth. I thought about the priest at Abuna Yemata Guh, about the old woman, about the manuscripts hidden in caves, and I realized something. Faith isn't about buildings. It's about what you're willing to protect, what you're willing to carry, what you refuse to let die. I returned to Lalibela one last time before leaving Ethiopia. There was one church I hadn't seen yet, the most iconic, the one that appears in every photograph, every documentary, every travel article about this place. Beat Georges. The Church of St. George. It's different from the others. Isolated. Carved not into a cliff or a trench, but straight down into the earth. A perfect cross-shaped monolith, hewn from a single block of stone, sitting at the bottom of a deep pit like a secret the earth tried to swallow. To reach it, you descend a narrow pathway cut into the rock, spiraling down until the walls rise around you and the sky shrinks to a small square of blue overhead. When I finally stood at the base, looking up at the church, I felt something I hadn't felt before. Not the peace of answers, but the peace of acceptance, of knowing that some things don't need to be understood. They just need to be witnessed. A priest approached me. He was older than the others I'd met, his beard gray, his movements slow but steady. He carried a small rolled parchment in his hand. "You've traveled far," he said. "I have." He handed me the parchment. "This is for you." I unrolled it carefully. The text was written in Guizi. I couldn't read it. "What does it say?" I asked. He smiled. "It says, for those who seek, the lost gods were never lost. They were only waiting." I left Lalibela at dawn. The town was still asleep, wrapped in mist that clung to the mountains like breath. Pilgrims were already gathering at the churches, their white robes glowing in the early light, their voices rising in hymns older than memory. I thought about everything I'd seen. The churches carved from stone. The priests copying manuscripts by candlelight. The climb to the church in the sky, the ruins of war, the frescoes that refused to fade. And I realized that Ethiopia's hidden churches were never really hidden at all. They were tests, to see who cared enough to search, who believed enough to climb, who loved something enough to protect it even when the world wanted to forget. So what do you think? Would you take that journey knowing what I know now? Would you climb that cliff, descend into those trenches, sit with those priests and listen to stories the world tried to erase? Share your thoughts below. And if this story moved you, subscribe to join me on the next one. Because there are more places like this. More secrets carved into stone. More gods waiting to be found. Until then, stay curious, stay brave, and never stop seeking the truth.